Good evening to colleagues that have recently joined us. My name is Maje Sipo, and I will be facilitating the proceedings today. It's 7:05, and I'm of the view that we have a considerable number to begin with the proceedings. So without further ado, colleagues, we will officially begin. One can assume that we are aware of the situation of Gaza and very much aware of the courageous step that the Republic of South Africa have undertaken to actually institute proceedings at the ICJ to seek provisional measures to halt everything that is happening in that particular territory. And the proceedings have been going. Today, they've officially concluded. South Africa argued yesterday, and Israel responded today. And some of you might remember that APGroN itself had a session on which it reflected on the case itself, and it undertook to also reflect post the case as it is doing today. But before we begin and get into everything, I would like to just welcome Professor Dube, who is the CEO of this organization, to just do preliminary remarks before we actually begin and deliberate on South Africa's case as ICJ. Professor, I open the spot for you to come and touch base. Professor, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Machi. I was so not ready for that, but as I always say, I was born ready. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming through to be with us today to just deliberate on the proceedings of the past 2 days in the case of South Africa versus Israel in the ICJ, where we saw South Africa lodge its complaint in the dispute between the two states aimed at protecting lives in the Gaza territory. Mine is simply to say APGroN acknowledges and appreciates your presence and your support in this particular forum, as you did in the past when the organization organized a session at the end of December to decide to deliberate on the lodgement of the case itself. And you're here with us today to deliberate on the proceedings in the interim measures application that was had between yesterday and today. And we hope you'll be with us again in the future when we meet again to discuss the deliberations around the main case in this particular issue. I will not be long, Mr. Machi, so that we can have time for the real issue that we're here to deliberate on today, except just to thank you everyone for coming through, and I hope this will be a fruitful exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. That is very much well appreciated. Colleagues, Prof is one of the panelists who will deliberate on the case. He will be answering some of our questions that we have, you know, as we have observed the case. He's not alone. He's joined by Advocate Mwekwa, who is a champion of South African Law Hub. That is also doing a fundamental work. Advocate, we want to begin, but I'm just going to give you also a platform to just say a few, because I've seen that this important event is done collaboratively with the South African Law Hub. Advocate?
Thank you very much, Sipo. No, definitely it's important for us as South Africans and Africans to reflect, especially on such important issues that are actually brought about, you know, by our country. And as young people, we have to obviously find our voice on global affairs, because they have a direct impact on us and how our situation here at home is, you understand? And more particularly when it is our very own legal practitioners that are presenting matters at such a level. And part of these discussions would also be to just encourage the next layer of young people to want to aspire to appear and represent, you know, the country at various forums internationally. And I'm looking forward to today's discussions, and I'm hoping to have fun, and I'm looking forward to hear what various members of the audience have to say and or questions they have to ask. But in any event, I'm ready to fire from all cylinders.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Colleagues, I would request that you keep the mics muted. so that we do not have interruptions. Colleagues, South Africa is arguing that Israel is engaged in a genocide. And international law is guiding us that for there to be a genocide, there must be a genocidal intent. And when I observed South Africa's case and around genocidal intent, for example, I believed, Prof, that Advocate Ngwetobi put forth a good argument on genocidal intent. However, today, Israel says, no, there is no genocidal intent on our side. In fact, South Africa is ignoring the efforts that Israel has undertaken while protected by humanitarian law. I just want you, Prof, to guide around that area and whether the argument by Israel has got any merit or none whatsoever.
Thank you much. Forgive me for taking this on and off. The light is really, really bad today. So I will on and off my glasses. When it becomes too much, I will put them on. If they begin to affect the way I see things, I will take them off. It's very interesting when deliberations of this nature happen. The first party to go on, you feel like you understand their case through and through. When the other party starts rebutting, there is going to be a semblance of confusion or obfuscation on what exactly is going on. If one looks at the Israeli case, you will notice that at the core of their argument was to take the question away from the center line being the Genocide Convention. They simply wanted to locate the conflict outside the ambit of the Genocide Convention. They wanted to say something is going on in Gaza, something is going on in Israel. It involves the killing and the harming of people, but it is in no ways genocide. They don't seem to say there are no acts going on. The acts are there. The two of them are in agreement. There are certain acts going on. South Africa is saying that. Israel is saying that. But South Africa is saying these acts are happening pursuant to a genocidal intent, pursuant to a policy that has been adopted by the government of Israel to annihilate, to destroy in whole or in part certain people, these people being Palestinians. The government of Israel is saying, yes, while there are certain acts going on the ground, these are not aimed at annihilating the Palestinians. These are simply acts that are flowing from what we call today urban warfare, which is the scourge of our times, conflicts happening within the inner city that is difficult to control. And because of that, we have a terrorist organization which is rolling out all these attacks that we are seeing, which we are trying to push back against as the government of Israel. It is not genocide that we're carrying out. We're simply trying to protect the citizens of Israel against an element within our territory which wants to destroy them. Now, when one looks at South Africa's case, in as far as it laid out the genocidal intent, how do we draw the conclusion that indeed there is a governmental policy which is upheld by all Israeli government officials, that policy of annihilating Palestinians? South Africa was clear in its tabling of evidence that here is the prime minister saying 1, 2, 3. Here is the president saying 1, 2, 3. Here's the minister of defense. He is a member of parliament. He is a member of the executive. They say these things, and the next day, forces on the ground carry out actions which show a correlation between the statement uttered the previous day and the action being carried out the next day. Israel came around to try and diffuse the situation. Whether they were successful or not, it stands to be seen. They tried to take apart some of the allegations or some of the statements which were said to have carried genocidal intent. They tried to say those were statements which were said in the aftermath of the action. We do not know how true that is. But they did not attend to all the statements that South Africa raised. They attended to some of them. They left some of them totally unanswered. For example, I'll give you an example of an allegation that was made about some old veteran who fought in the other war back in the day, 75 years ago. And he was being paraded by the government of Israel, by the military of Israel, going around, giving motivation to the soldiers to say, you must crush them. This time around, you must thoroughly crush them. And he was wearing Israeli military regalia. The government did not necessarily address that particular issue in their submissions. So they did not address all the allegations that were made. They might have tried to, spin some of them out of context, but they didn't address all of them. In other words, there are certain allegations which were made yesterday about certain officers of the government of Israel who have gone around uttering certain utterances which are inflammatory, which contain elements of a genocidal nature, elements which can be said to be fueling a genocidal intent that were not rebutted today in court. Thank you.
A very comprehensive answer, Professor. That is very much appreciated. Colleagues, if Professor is giving an answer and a thought is running, please note it and then ask it afterwards. There will be a question and session. Also, you could put it in the chat, just maybe if it might disappear a bit. But Professor, if I could digress a bit, I just want to find out if there could exist a ground of justification for genocide. Can a state fully complying with the law of war, the law of armed conflict, be said to have committed a genocide?
If I may quickly, Sipho, before you move to that next question.
Yes, I do.
There's another element that the Israeli government tried to articulate. And one thing that Prof raised very clearly is that you have obviously the president, you have the prime minister, you've got the minister of defense who's responsible for the military, right? But also you've got then the military commanders and the troops on the ground. And what Advocate Nkaitobi, in my view, did very well was to connect the fact that here are these genocidal statements and utterances that are made. And when they were made, they were not made by somebody who does not have influence in shaping the policy direction of the state of Israel. In fact, it is those people that when the 7th of October happened, they were having the responsibility to respond and to clearly articulate the position of the state of Israel. And in linking the political intent with the military intent and then the actions of the troops of the ground, you clearly see that the genocidal intent was communicated at the top. It cascaded down to military commanders who then ensured that it is executed by the troops on the ground. But they tried to then make this distinction between, for example, to say, but they are Israeli people that, based on anger and emotions they're feeling at the time, albeit in the legislature, let's say in their Knesset, that they could articulate things that are not necessarily government policy, but are personal feelings of those individuals. And they tried to go to that line. But then they went further to say, but go and look at the military directives, the rules of engagement, the doctrines. They do not talk about genocidal intent because those documents, as they are drafted, clearly articulates and or is in alignment with what the law of armed conflict dictates, right? But the question now is this: how do we know that genocidal intent is a government policy or a personal opinion of somebody? You see, do we just accept the statements, the mere utterances, or must we look at something that is probably written somewhere? And that would determine essentially whether the scales fall on the side of the Republic or on the side of Israel. And that it hinges on this question. And if we then say that the statements of the Prime Minister, of the President, of the Minister of Defense responsible for military commanders can articulate the policy position of the state, even if it's not written, then there is our genocidal intent, in my view. I just thought
Your
I had
view,
such.
your view is appreciated, Advocate. It's very, very, very much appreciated. We have expanded on it, and I believe colleagues are also grasping that. Thank you for providing that other angle as well. I think you can also come and touch on this one. I just want to move a little bit. We're just going to come back to the case, Prof. I just want to expand my, understanding, and hopefully another colleague could also be interested in the answer. If genocide could be justified by law of war, I just want to touch on that. Can humanitarian law actually justify genocide?
The quickest answer is no, because genocide is the crime of crimes. It's the highest, the epitome of human degradation. And it shows that we've lost our humanity when we do that. The reason today we are still being told of the Holocaust and what Hitler did to the Jews is because it holds that much. It's the highest form of human deprivation, and there can be no justification for it. In other words, does Israel have the right to defend itself in terms of the law of war, in terms of humanitarian law? Yes, indeed. If there's a particular interest of Israel that is being affected, Israel has the right to defend itself. However, it cannot cross the threshold and start peddling genocidal elements or start peddling a genocidal approach to dealing with its opponents. So within the context of the law of war, Israel cannot necessarily say, give that blanket to say, this is us defending ourselves. If it is proven that indeed there were genocidal statements or utterances that were made, even if Israel says this was in defense of itself, those genocidal elements would actually thwart the claims that Israel has. To just touch on what Advocate has spoken about now, the issue of Israel trying to run away from the genocidal intent by saying that, but our commanders on the ground have military doctrines and manuals that tell them how to conduct operations. The conduct of operations in those manuals does not say that we must annihilate, we must crush, we must destroy in total the people of Palestine. Now, there is no state in this world that is dumb enough to actually put it in writing and say, our military doctrine says you get a Palestinian, you chop off the entire village. It is never written anywhere. All military manuals and all military manuals will align themselves with the Geneva Conventions. They will align themselves with customary international law, because nobody wants to leave a paper trail. As Advocate says, Israel seems to point towards those manuals. But the problem with Israel doing that is that no one wants to leave a paper trail. They will not necessarily have them there. But as the Advocate has said, statements have been spoken, have been uttered by officers who are not, ordinary civilians on the ground, officers who influence policy, officers whose statements will carry value and will carry weight within the conduct of these hostilities. So, these statements have been seen in the past to contain elements which would be frowned upon not only by the law that prohibits genocide, but also by the law of war. For one to actually say that no quarter shall be given, if a commander says no quarter shall be given, he basically means you shall leave, take no prisoner, kill everything, you annihilate everything. Statements like those have been heard from the Israeli side, not necessarily from the commanders per se, but from officers of the state of Israel who hold positions of responsibility and whose voices could easily influence the conduct of hostilities on the ground. So within the context of conducting hostilities within the law of war, within humanitarian law, nobody is allowed to then cross the threshold and enter the sphere of what you call genocide under the guise that they're defending themselves. There are limits even to the case of self-defense. If I can make an example in the domestic sector, you can't come to me and say, give me your lunchbox. And I can see you're threatening me. You want to take my lunchbox. And what do? I take my gun and I shoot you. There's no proportionality. I've exceeded the bounds of how I could defend that property of mine, which was my lunchbox. So Israel cannot come here and say they're defending themselves by engaging in genocide, by peddling genocidal actions. So that's the short answer to that question. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Professor. That is very much appreciated. Colleagues, what a comprehensive answer, profound and straight to the point. Professor, thank you very much. We, colleagues, I want to move from the genocidal intent because I think it's the crux of genocide. To prove genocide, there must be an intent to that particular genocide. Prof, I want to then move to provisional measures. If genocide is proved or there's an intent to genocide, then the measures that in the interim must be made are imperative. So South Africa is saying the ICJ must order interim measures to hold these undertakings. So, Professor, I'm a student that has had a pleasure of understanding international law, at UNISA, being taught by yourself and Dr. Mhlongo. And I've learned that ICJ orders, their enforcement, there is quite a difficulty when they comes to their enforcement. So I want you to expand, Prof. If we are to get these provisional measures, please touch on their enforceability.
Yeah, you're touching on a very interesting aspect of international law, Mr. Machi, the question of enforcement, which is why every student of international law would have had at some point to contend with the question, is international law really law? It always flows from a question like this, that yes, we get these interim measures, and then what?
Yeah.
Then what? Well, interim measures or provisional measures, as we call them, are simply meant to say the main arguments are still coming. But while we wait for those main arguments, we cannot necessarily wait in vain and hope that things improve on their own. Let us have a pronouncement that says the aggressing party must desist from aggressing so that we preserve human life, so that we preserve a particular right and interest, which if we don't preserve now through the use of provisional measures, we will not be able to reverse the harm that will be occasioned by the failure to impose those interim measures. But you know that international law, unlike domestic law, the enforcement mechanisms are a bit cumbersome because there is no enforcement agency to say the court has issued an order, I must now go and execute this order, must now go and ensure that it is enforced. But however, the pronouncement, if we were to get the pronouncement right, it would be a seminal instance in international law to say there has been a pronouncement that this state is in violation of the Geneva Convention, and it has been told to stop actions A, B, C, D, as directed by the order of the court. If there was no enforcement, then the matter would have to be brought within because a failure to enforce or a failure to comply with the order of this court would actually constitute a threat to international peace. And we know how we handle a threat to international peace. The UN system gets involved in that particular process. And the one unit that has the power to enforce peace in that way is the United Nations Security Council, which would then have to look at the matter that's brought before it and decide if it must adopt a resolution requesting for intervention to ensure that international peace is not disturbed in that manner. But we know that that mechanism with the big five, the permanent 5 members of the international, of the Security Council, there is the veto power that they have, which would stop any form of trying to enforce an order in that particular manner. So if Israel was to go back on its promises and continue to bombard, continue to annihilate, there is no resolution of the UN Security Council that we would get that would authorize states to intervene in Israel to protect innocent civilians because of the veto power. We know, for instance, that America would never vote against Israel. They will forever vote with Israel, come rain or high water. So that therein lies the problem with enforcement of this particular order.
If I may also just add a few words, right, Sipho?
Yes.
First and foremost, with the crime of genocide, it's particular acts that are prohibited. One of which, for example, is public incitement for people to commit genocide, right? So there are individuals in the public domain who are on national television who are making utterances that essentially incite the public to commit acts of genocide. And then there are individuals at a lower level that are executing these actions to commit this act of genocide or conspiracy to commit genocide or attempt to commit genocide. So those individuals, the state has their responsibility to ensure that those that commit these acts are held to account. So this one thing that came very clearly today is that the state of Israel prides itself as a state that complies with the rule of law. They comply with international law. That is the mantle they are seemingly carrying, right? And if that is the case, you've got the Deputy Attorney General that was presenting, and he said, no, we are independent, right? But that independence in the enforcement question, where are those people that are being tried and prosecuted or being investigated for the acts of genocide that they have committed, whether it's public incitement, whether it's genocidal or any other genocidal utterances? Currently, we've got zero. So there's nothing that says to us the state of Israel has an appetite. And this is where Prof comes in when he talks about when the state refuses, is unwilling and unable to prosecute these members, right? But also, when it comes to the military command, there is the office which the Deputy Attorney General spoke about, which is the Judge Advocate General office that essentially is the head of legal services within the IDF. And there too, for the commanders and soldiers that are committing these acts of genocide, where are the investigations and or prosecutions that have been activated to ensure that the state of Israel has an appetite? You see, and what is interesting again is what Prof has spoken about, the fact that the veto power is peddled by, obviously it will always be the United States of America with the United Kingdom on the other side. And the UN certainly will not have an appetite, the UN Security Council, in light of this veto power. But now here's the question. The member states, the high contracting parties, have the responsibility to enforce. So which one is brave enough to go and try to intervene to enforce? Because one, the crime of genocide, there's universal jurisdiction, right? So with universal jurisdiction, it means that every nation in the world has an interest in ensuring that those that commit acts of genocide are held to account. So which state is strong enough to go and stand and face the fourth strongest military in the world, supported by the father, who's the United States of America, who's the strongest in the world, and the uncle, who's the United Kingdom, who's another big military power with nuclear capability, all three of them. So the point I am equally raising is that, one, there's no appetite at domestic level, there's no appetite in the IDF, and definitely there are obstacles at the UN level, but still then again, the contracting parties who have the mandate don't have the courage. How many countries could have brought this application? 49 Arab countries, but South Africa brought the application. They are even afraid to speak. Now, do you think they'll now take up arms and challenge the powers that be? Chances are zero. And that is the challenges with the enforcement mechanism.
Yo, Thank you very much, Advocate. As you give answers, colleagues, one of the thoughts that come in mind might appear to be a point that you might have addressed. So please forgive me when I ask you a question that is somehow not in a sequence. I'm not asking a sequence because when you give an answer, there will be this thought that, takes one back to a point that might have been addressed. So as you are answering, colleagues, I heard one of the counsel for Israel arguing that the atrocities on the 7th of October actually warranted Israel to engage in a self-defense. And I heard one of them also saying, look, these measures, if granted, will take away, Israel's right to self-defense. And Prof, you touched a bit on this, on the aspect of proportionality. You gave a very good example here in domestic law that, look, if you take my lunchbox and then I shoot you, obviously that is not proportional and then cannot be acceptable. So perhaps what Israel have done is much higher and not actually, proportional to whatever harm it could be thwarting. So I want you colleagues to simply touch on the law of self-defense into this aspect. You have touched on it briefly. I just, on behalf of colleagues, asking an expansion into that area, please. Professor, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Machi. You will recall that the law of self-defense requires that there must be imminent harm. It must be in the heat of, heat of passion. You can't, call it self-defense if you've allowed the situation to cool down. Come back 3 months later and you're saying self-defense. There is no evidence that the attack that Israel might have gotten on the 7th continues at that level or in that intensity to this day. So the question would be, is there imminent harm? Is it happening now that requires Israel to defend itself? That having been said, even if there was imminent harm, you do not necessarily go all out and exceed the parameters of proportionality by declaring that people should be annihilated, should be crushed. Because if one looks at how Israel approached it, the statements were clear. The statements are typical of statements which precede a genocide. How do you carry out a genocide? You start by labeling the other person as an other. You start by othering them. In other words, you remove their humanity. You disrupt them of their humanity. You call them animals, you call them cockroaches, you call them whatever nefarious thing that comes to mind, so that you assuage your guilt. By the time you bombard them, you're killing cockroaches. You're no longer feeling guilt. So we saw it with the Rwanda genocide, that people were being called cockroaches, and the genocidal statements were to the effect that you must crush the cockroaches. So that was the statement going around, and that was a code for annihilate the opponents. We saw it with Hitler as well. He used similar ideology, used similar statements where you dehumanize the person before you actually kill them. We're seeing it in Israel now. There has been this continuous reference to human animals. I don't even know what that means. But maybe they say it in their language and it makes sense, but when it is translated to English, we lose it a little bit, because there's been references to human animals. In other words, it looks human, but it is not human. It is worse than a human. Therefore, it's good to kill it. It's a Palestinian. And that was raised by South Africa a lot yesterday, and Israel did not respond specifically to those words, because that's where the genocidal intent is packed on the use of human animals in reference to what Israel perceives as its enemy. So Israel has already recalibrated the outlook of its enemy so that it is no longer a human, it is an animal worthy of destruction. Thank you, Mr. Machi.
Much appreciated.
If I may add, Sipho.
Yes, Advocate.
One thing that we must remember, especially in relation to the right to self-defense, it's an inherent right? Nobody can give you, and it's one of the exceptions actually on the prohibition on the use of force, right? So one thing that was not in dispute in this case is that in terms of the events that took place on the 7th of October, Israel had the right to repel the imminent threats that it faced from the missiles that were being thrown, right? But now, how many months have passed, right? Are the attacks still the same? Or is the nature of the current attacks maybe at a lower scale as before the 7th of October? Or do they continue at the level, at the scale that requires Israel to still use 2,000-pound bombs, right? And bombs at the scale that it's using, airstrikes, missiles, and all of these things. And remember, Prof just spoke about imminent threats, right? Are there risks to Israel at the scale of the 7th of October? We have not seen it. Even to this day, when they speak about the casualties in Israel, they talk about 1,200. That 1,200 number was the number of the 7th of October. Now, where are the new figures that seeks to tell us and the people of the world that Hamas is still continuing at the rate that it started, right? And if not, then there's nothing that justifies the current intensity of that armed conflict in terms of the actions. And this is where now, maybe initially, the government of Israel and the IDF, had the right to this self-defense, right? But now the question is, have they exceeded the bounds of self-defense? Because the threat, the risks are no longer imminent or there, right? Or if they are there, now, for example, it's a small terrorist organization, Hamas. And how were they dealing with it prior to the 7th of October? Because that threat has always been ongoing threat. It never stopped. But the scale and the intensity after the 7th of October went way above, right? So the point is this, again, the point that Prof spoke about earlier. If we establish that there's a genocide ongoing, that self-defense, the taking of hostages, the killing of 1,200 cease to be a justification for you to commit a genocide. And that is why Israel is vehemently dealing with, it's running away from the court pronouncing that there is genocide. Because if there is genocide, then everything else that it's doing, continues to do, is completely illegal and against international law.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Thank you very much, Professor, as well. Colleagues, ordinarily, we would have an question and answer session at the end. But because I see only one hand from my colleague Thabisa, I'm going to give you a benefit to ask your question now, while it is fresh to either Professor or Advocate. Thabisa, let me give you this moment. Please unmute. Your mic is still muted. Yeah.
Is it fine now? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. Now it's unmuted. We can hear you very well.
Okay.
But we can't see you. I see you are trying to make a video, but I cannot see you. I'm not sure if my colleagues can see you. We cannot. But since the voice is clear, I think just proceed. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can see you now.
Yeah, sorry. Apologies about my lighting. I have some load shedding on my side. But in any event, I just have two questions for the Prof and all advocates. I think the first one is, are we not severely overlooking the fact that Counsel for Israel did mention that the IDF, which is the defense force, was making a serious effort to make sure that the civilians are moved to a safer place, were warned, actually, in fact, to move away from certain zones. And if I understand correctly, there was a particular zone where Hamas was not hiding in, right? So they had pamphlets, they had all sorts of things to warn the civilian, would you please just stay away from these areas and whatnot. So are we not overlooking that fact? Because from my understanding, in order to see intent, one of the things that we can discern intent is by conduct, right? Because we can't get inside people's brains. So we have to look at the conduct of how you acted. And this conduct is very much showing the contrary of what South Africa is alleging, to say that there was a genocidal intent. If you want to wipe out an entire group, you're not going to warn them to say, please stay away from this area, don't do this and that. Hitler, when he wanted to wipe out the Jews, he put them in concentration camps. He gassed a lot of them. Also, the Rwandan situation was mentioned. There were no warning to people to say, be safe and all of those things. So are we not perhaps unfairly overlooking that fact? But if we are, can there be a justification to say why are those actions of Israel so insignificant? That's my first question. And then the second question with regards to self-defense, this might be, I don't know, for me, from a practical standpoint, where Israel says that Hamas was using people, the Palestinians, as body shields, right? In such that they built their tunnels under hospitals, they built their tunnels under normal houses, and they were wearing civilian clothes in order to disguise themselves. So now, if we are saying that Israel's actions were disproportionate, which I'm not saying they were not, how else would one go about seeking out an enemy that seeks to destroy you, an enemy that has intimated many times before that they hate the Jews, they want to exterminate the Jews, there is no place for the Jews in Palestine. So how do you go about removing that enemy from your borders and thus putting your own citizens at risk? What other alternatives could there have been for Israel other than what happened? Thank you.
I think, Prof, if I may, maybe I must start to shoot first, and then Prof can go and do the final exploitations.
Yeah.
There's one thing that as South Africans we must, I don't know what's happening. There's one thing that we must accept, and I thank Thabisa for a very complicated question. Now, Thabisa, is it our understanding, and is it how Israel presented its case, that every single incident and every single attack that they made was justified because there was perfidy on the part of every single, victim on the other side? All 21,000 of them were engaged in perfidy, and therefore this fate of death had to befall them. Is that how we understand? The 7,000 or 8,000 children, they were also busy with perfidy. Those that are unborn were also busy with perfidy. By the way, Thabisa, go and read up on who dug those tunnels that they are talking about. It was not a tunnel dug by Hamas. There were tunnels that were dug by the Israeli government at the time when they were still busy before 2004. All right? So they know exactly where the tunnels are. As to whether or not now every tunnel is linked to a house, it's linked to a hospital, it's linked to whatever, it's a question of the law of conflict. But remember now, we are in the domain to check whether there was or there were acts of genocide, right? Whether they were incitement, whether they were what, they were what, all right? So I don't take that argument from Israel that everything was about perfidy. Yes, we saw instances, and I think they tried to make a very good case with the photos they showed, where from hospitals there were the Hamas was using hospitals, to launch their attacks, or they were using homes to launch their attacks. But remember, military operations by their nature are intelligence driven, right? What it means is that before you go and you strike, you know exactly, because why? Every military commander must find, fix, and destroy. In the finding stage, where you're trying to locate the enemy equipment, the enemy assets, where they are operating, the strength and all, so that you know the legitimate military targets to engage. All of those things. All of those things in the finding stage, the intelligence of that state must make sure they are able to know exactly who is the enemy or the combatant and who is the civilian, who is protected and who is not protected. And also whether or not the civilians that they targeted were directly participating in hostilities. That is another issue. And again, now there's another question that Israel is also putting the blame to Hamas. Everything is about Hamas and what Hamas is doing. Because they say over 2,000 missiles were misfired by Hamas, resulting in the death. How many strikes did Israel take responsibility for today? And say, in this instance, for example, we shot, this was the level of collateral damage in terms of innocent civilians that died, and this is how we justify the collateral damage vis-a-vis the military advantage to be gained thereby. All right, we saw zero of that. And why is that? And for me, that is a very telling issue to say Israel essentially is being evasive instead of coming clean, because they have the numbers, they did the campaigns, they did the plans, they did the targeting considerations. They are the people that know exactly who they struck, what was the collateral damage, anticipated, because you must anticipate collateral damage before. So they should have been able to tell us. But what we saw today, in my view, in as far as this issue is concerned, is that Hamas is blamed to say you are using human shields and that there is perfidy. But on the other issue is whether we are overlooking the effort made by the IDF. I think in terms of what the IDF has done in trying to mitigate the collateral damage and incidental loss to life, Tabisa, I must agree with you that it is noble that the placards were sent out, SMSs were sent out, and many others. But here's one thing that they forgot to consider as a factor, which is the urban battle space where the conflict is happening. And when you go and you fight in a small area, such as the Gaza Strip, where 2.9 million people are concentrated, the flats and the whatever in there, you are bound to, if you're going to have a military operation there, your risk of collateral damage is bound to be high, excessive, right? And your precautionary measures that you must take is far higher, right? So your collateral damage is also far higher. And that is why we are seeing the numbers at the large scale. And if we compare, for example, Tabisa, if we look at the war in Russia with Ukraine, it took over 18 months for there to be a death of about 16,000 people, right? Here in this case, if you see the intensity, in less than 1 month, we're already at about over 17,000, if not close to 17,000. You understand? So that is the difference between the battle space, which is an urban area with high-rise building, schools, and all of these things nearby. But for me, the measures definitely, if we look at the number of deaths, although Commander Bull was not sufficient.
Advocate Myokwa speaks. Thank you very much, Advocate. Much appreciated. Professor?
Thank you, Mr. Machi. Thank you, Tabisa, for the question. Very complex question, I must say. And thank you to the Advocate for handling quite a number of the issues that arose there. And I believe you have clearly articulated the situation. Now, let me start with the question of the use of perfidy, because what was clear throughout the arguments of the Israeli council was that Palestinians, in fact, they call them Hamas. They don't want to refer to the nationality of the people. They rather refer to them as Hamas because they want to be seen as fighting this terrorist, so-called terrorist organization. But what their argument is simply that they're committing perfidy. They hide in schools, they hide in ambulances, so that they have the cover of the law and then from there they can fire unannounced. However, what is clear from here is that for the commander on the ground, the issue of targeting, the issue of determining what is a legitimate military target is very, very important. And the analysis of the collateral damage that will accrue from that particular strike is very, very critical. Because before the commander strikes, he needs to have satisfied himself that indeed I have surveilled the area. I know where the threat lies. I know I can now distinguish between civilians and combatants, because simply hiding the arms in a school does not necessarily make the children combatants. They are still children going to school. They are minors. They're not taking part in the hostilities. You cannot therefore, just decimate them like that at will without any consequence. So the Israeli army needs to focus on
colleagues, Mr. Martin, please mute your mic. Mr. Mandla Fubesi, you are welcome. Please also mute your mic so that we do not have interruptions, colleagues. Professor, please continue.
All right. So the decision to either attack or not attack lies with the commander, who must satisfy themselves that the collateral damage will be within the acceptable threshold. But that is one thing for the commander to accept, that if I strike this hospital, 20 children might die and they're innocent, and it's acceptable because of the situation we're facing. It's another if that strike comes after assertions and expressions such as we must crush these human animals. We must crush them wherever we find them. It then takes a different slant altogether. On the issue of are we severely overlooking the ADF efforts to move civilians to safer spaces? Look, Israel was clear in court today that they announced, they airdrop pamphlets, they SMS, they tweet, they do radio announcements. But interestingly, they're doing this in a situation where even access to solar panels, access to electricity, access to the basic means of communication.
Mr. Martin, you are very interruptive, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Machir.
Please continue, Prof.
Yes.
Apologies.
So the efforts of the IDF happen in the context of an area which has been cordoned off, an area which is under siege, an area which doesn't have access to electricity. I mean, for you to see a tweet, you need the networks, you need data, you need electricity, and you need to have the luxury of a phone. And this is in the middle of an urban conflict. And Israel is saying, but we do tweet, we do send SMSs to people who may not even have access to electricity. And they say they're communicating with them to tell them which routes to take for safe evacuation. And again, there you need to just oppose what the IDF is saying through those pamphlets vis-a-vis what the Prime Minister and the President and the Minister of Defense and all the other officials are saying in the expressions which contain genocidal intent. And ask yourself, despite their efforts to airdrop these pamphlets, but their leaders are saying something else. They're referring to people as human animals. Are they going to turn around now and start evacuating those very same human animals, as they call them? Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Prof. Ms. Tabisa, I think in the end, we can give you an opportunity to also say your remarks based on the answers given. And moving forward, colleagues, kindly please mute your mics, colleagues, so that as Professor or Advocate Meko answers, then the chain of thoughts are not interrupted. As he stops, he might lose the chain of thoughts and no longer give us what we want, colleagues. Let's just, please, as you log out and come back, ensure that the mic is indeed muted. Prof. Advocate, today, when I listened to the Council of Israel, I heard him arguing an angle of prematurity. He kept saying South Africa did not provide us with a reasonable opportunity to respond. They never engaged us. Chiki, they are in court, and then we have to appear there. So I do not know if that is fatal to our application, that element of prematurity. Could this be fatal to our application, or somehow the court can overlook this and give us the order that we seek? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Machia. The question, yes, you're right. Israel is claiming it's premature, and because it's premature, there's no dispute. They are claiming that they did not have engagements outside the court system, which engagement could have led to the conclusion that we are indeed in a dispute. Because before the court can have jurisdiction, there must be a dispute. Now, South Africa says one thing, Israel says another. But Israel is saying currently, them not seeing eye to eye is not a dispute per se. It would have been a dispute if they were given enough time. You notice that 21 December, a note verbal is sent from Pretoria to Jerusalem by South Africa saying, what are you guys doing? Why are you violating the Genocide Convention? On the same day, Israel transmits the note verbal forward. The note verbal is a communication from diplomatic mission to diplomatic mission. That's how governments communicate. The Israelis delay for about 5 days. Around about the 27th, Israel tries to respond to the non-verbal by submitting a physical non-verbal in South Africa. And that time we were on holiday. South Africa says, no, don't disturb us on holiday. It's December. We're Decembering. We'll deal with you later. It's a holiday in South Africa. We're not working. 29th December, South Africa is launching its application. So that is the root of Israel's disdain with the manner in which South Africa has approached this. They are saying you didn't give us enough time. You talked to us on the 21st. By the 29th, we were in court. Therefore, there's not dispute. Had you listened to us, had you listened to our response, you would have perhaps been persuaded that indeed there's no dispute. I find there's a very, very weak argument to raise. The fact that they're already not seeing eye to eye means there is a dispute. The fact that South Africa says your actions are in violation of the Geneva correction of the Genocide Convention, and Israel is saying, nope, this is squarely within the ambit of self-defense, within the law of war, and within the conduct of hostilities in the urban space, means there is a dispute. They're not agreeing. They're not seeing eye to eye. So and a dispute already exists. There was no need for them to go back and forth. In other words, if people are dying, if the allegations that people are dying by their numbers every day, should we really be massaging the egos of a politician so that we can come to the conclusion that there's a dispute before we litigate? Or should we place our trust in the ICJ and say, if we run there as fast as we can get provisional measures and preserve human life? So that argument, I don't necessarily see it catapulting South Africa's case per se. They try to rely on some previous cases where the court might have pronounced in a particular way, but we know that the rule of precedent does not necessarily apply here. This is the ICJ, is not a domestic court. So I don't see it catapulting the case of South Africa in that regard. The fact that South Africa wrote to them on the 21st and then ran to the ICJ on the 29th does not necessarily mean there's no dispute. There is a dispute. That's why we're in court today. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. There is clearly a dispute. Therefore, Prof, the Israel's argument is extremely weak. So I'm just going to ask this question, and the background is based on my understanding of domestic law, Prof. I know our courts here could grant, any order that it deems fit, other than the one that is sought. So I'm not being negative, but if we lose, in getting this provisional measure, as we have obviously pleaded on papers, could the court make an alternative order? Because I know Constitutional Court can make any other order that it deems necessary. Does that apply in international law? I just wanna see, if there is a little bit of similarity, concerning international law and the domestic law, Professor.
Almost, Mr. Machi, whether South Africa loses this case or wins, it is still a win for international law. It is still a win for human rights. It is still a win for, the people who are being bombarded right now. It doesn't matter which way it goes. The challenge with an alternative order here would be that these are provisional measures. They're supposed to hold until the matter is finalized. So what South Africa has asked for, South Africa will be given if the court agrees with that. The court might not necessarily be at liberty to start crafting, orders that might actually not have been appearing on the papers per se. Because remember that the main issue is still going to be, the merits are still going to be deliberated. We're simply now at the provisional measures stage, and we're simply saying until we finish deliberating on the issues of the merit, let us have a cessation of hostilities. Let us have a cessation of the killings of innocent civilians by the Israeli forces.
That is clear. I see Advocate wants to come in. Advocate, please come in.
Thank you very much, good sir. At the end of the day, remember now there's about 9 provisional measures that South Africa wants, right? And obviously, counter arguments to those provisional measures were given by Israel, right? So obviously, the court would have an opportunity to look at both, be able to look how practical the implementation of those court orders would be in terms of the efficacy, and then would be able to say either it takes all of them, or either it then says we take this and this and not this. So the court is empowered to make whatever decision that it deems fit in the situation, right? But one thing that I wanted to clarify quickly is it's also just to add to what Prof alluded to earlier in terms of the Israel's position, right? So one thing that is clear is that you say to us that there is no dispute, right? Now, South Africa says, but we've made previously public statements, where we address this issue. Even to this day, it says that eventually Israel brought, its response. And that response, it responded the way they want without it necessarily resolving the issue. You see, even to this day, you ask Israel, would you agree with me that you committed acts of genocide? Israel would still say no. In the courtroom, on the papers, already there is a disagreement on essential question of whether Israel committed acts of genocide or not. Is that not a dispute? As to now, the fact that we consulted, but qualitatively we didn't consult sufficiently enough, that's a different question. But there was an attempt at whatever level to try and bring about a settlement of this issue, and there remains a disagreement at the heart of the issue as to whether or not there is. So I think even if, again, or one thing again that I want to say is that they equally subjected themselves to the jurisdiction of the court and responded to the entire appeared and they responded. They spoke for 3 hours. They engaged the application of the. Didn't they subject themselves to the jurisdiction of the court in that way?
Advocate, I'm gonna leave that to the court's ruling. Yes.
Mr. Machi, if I may, if I may come in just to supplement the submissions from the advocate on the issue of provisional measures, that yes, there are two sides. There's South Africa that has given the court its shopping list of provisional measures. Then there's the counter from Israel, as advocate has said, that Israel has also countered those provisional measures. So there are those two levels at which the court can draw from, the South African shopping list and the Israeli shopping list. However, Article 41 of the ICJ statute also empowers the court to make any provisional measures. In other words, suo motu, the court of its own accord could actually think, we think this other provisional measure can be added on top of these to make it work. So the court can actually go ahead and do that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Advocate. Colleagues, let's talk about DECO. Let's talk about the role of DECO in this particular case. What is its stance in this particular case of national, of course, and international importance? When I say national, I mean, Professor, on the previous event, you touched upon why. I mean, the South Africans have been asking, why do we leave, Pretoria and go all the way to Netherlands? Exactly what are we doing there? So, of course, you touched on the fact that there are obligations that South Africa has, and based on the Genocide Convention itself, because it is a party to that particular, treaty. So, I just want to get your picture, colleagues, on the role of DECO. Advocate, I'm going to start with you to just expand on the role of DECO in its stance in this particular case of national and international importance.
Sipone, just to show you how eloquent DECO was in addressing this particular matter. Maybe I see people there on the group, Hotats, or maybe must tell us what she believes the position of DECO is. I see Niku there. She must tell us what she believes DECO is, right? I say this jokingly because it is one of the clearest things that DECO has done, and that is to be excellent in articulating South Africa's position in as far as the situation in Gaza and the whole is concerned, all right? So if I understand in relation to what's happening in Ethiopia, they probably would not know. You see my point. So
Advocate, you are breaking. I'm not sure if it's on my side, but you are breaking a bit.
Yeah, he's breaking on my side as well.
Advocate
actually elevated and went beyond to over communicate with South Africans to essentially say that people of South Africa.
Advocate,
Mr. Machi, we seem to have lost the advocate.
Yeah, but in the interim, thank you, Prof. In the interim, colleagues, I think the colleagues that were called by advocate touch on DECO. You actually should come and expand on DECO if you are in a position to do so, colleagues, if you don't mind. Advocate, we're just gonna give you a second now. We are already opening this platform for the colleagues that you called, that whom you were of the view that could actually give us a perspective on DECO, because we are breaking a bit, so we are giving you a leeway.
It is network, my brother. Maybe I must just end, but the point that I wanted to say is that one thing that South Africans, we complain a lot, right? And one of the big arguments that South Africans brought about is that, but no, Why do we live here and go offshore? We've got too many problems here at home, right? And I want to always make this very simple statement. I've got a house, right? And in this house, I've got a housekeeper and I've got a gardener, right? And the gardener is doing an excellent, meticulous job in representing, you know, because everybody sees the garden outside if they pass in the street, right? But in the house, it is so bad, it's dirty, it's smelly, it's whatever. Are we going to say to the gardener, stop working up until we've sorted this housekeeper first, and then you can start working? Or are we going to encourage the excellence of the gardener, in this case, the excellence of DECO, and say, but no, home affairs, water affairs, small business, whatever, this is the standard, right? And that is what we need to do as South Africans. We need to give flowers to Mena Lady Pando and her team. They did an excellent job, right? They are putting the big guns under pressure right now. America is sweating, right? Israel is sweating. The UK is sweating. If many forgot, there are airstrikes that started in Yemen today, right? Against the Houthis as a result of the Red Sea closed, né? Because now it starts to affect their money. The point I'm making is when South Africa takes its rightful place in executing its obligations, remember it has obligations in terms of the Geneva Convention. As a party to the United Nations, it has obligations, all right? And when we do well in terms of our foreign policy and the pursuit of our foreign policy objectives and our national interest, then we must applaud DECO. But we cannot expect to say, let's wait first until the house is completely clean, then we will. Because it means then we will never get anything right anyway. That's why there are different governments, different government departments, and there's a demarcation of responsibility. DECO is worried about foreign relations, and DECO is doing well, excellent. Everybody else must follow suit, period. But to demonstrate my point, ask our fellow members. They will tell you the position of the Republic, because DECO was so clear, so excellent, and now DECO's pressure is to keep the standard going forward.
Yeah. Professor, your perspective on DECO?
I think it's been articulated very nicely by the advocate. I may not need to add anything extra. They're to be commended for, their clarity on the Palestine issue. I don't know what motivated them. I don't know whether it was lobbying from, the Palestinian voices that ensured that the Palestinian issues take the center state that they have taken, and there's clarity in terms of governmental policy, in terms of the policy of the Republic. So they are to be commended for that. We just hope that going forward, for all issues of international relations across the continent and across the globe, we will know as South Africans what exactly are we dealing with, what is the stance of our government, and how we should position ourselves. Thank you.
No. Thank you very much, Prof. My last question on my side, colleagues, and we don't want to prolong the proceedings, and we just going to have another session whereby we can all engage as we wrap things up. But my last questions to the panelists is the reflection on our legal team. Of course, everyone is having an opinion. So-and-so was supposed to have been selected. So-and-so was supposed to have been selected. Why that one? Why not this one? But generally, let's reflect on our legal team and our general view on the case, on whether or not we stand a good chance to come with a positive order as soon as these proceedings are concluded, Prof. And we're swiftly going to jump to a whole collective engagement as we now draw closer to closing this session.
Thank you, Machia. It was interesting to actually see the composition of the team. Yes, there were some Irish lawyers and so forth and so forth, but we saw some familiar faces. We saw people that looked like us. Advocate, if you want to go first?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Let me.
No, Prof. I'll come after you, Prof. I must take dressing.
All right. For me, the most interesting thing was to see two professors that matter in the study of international law for me. One was Professor Dugard, he taught me international law at UP. To see him at his old age standing there and defending, practicalizing what he had taught was quite interesting. And then Afro to see him there as well was quite enlightening. It was quite enlightening to say, here is the hue of the type of lawyers we want to see out there, not only in the domestic space, but out there in the international tribunals. But the other interesting thing, because I know some of those people, some of them worked with them at the Constitutional Court, their junior counsel in this matter. They didn't necessarily speak, but they were part of the team. The other one was Malcolm Shaw. Malcolm Shaw, if you follow my decolonial writings, you will notice that I often take apart his claims on international law. And I remember that there's a point where one was almost not published because one dared to criticize Malcolm Shaw. So I know what Malcolm Shaw means to the Western white mind. Malcolm Shaw is their god of international law. So it was interesting to see Malcolm Shaw standing there and John Dugat standing there on opposite sides of this dispute. And the manner in which they were conceptualizing their attacks on the claims of either side was quite interesting. I saw on the one side a very Eurocentric and Westernized fixation on moving away from the claim on the part of Malcolm Shaw to say the claim is genocide, but I'm going to try as much as I can to avoid mentioning genocide and hammer and hammer and hammer on things that take us away from genocide to the law of war, to other areas of the law. And while you are seeing Dugat on the other side, hammering on the basis of genocide and the obligations of the states to prevent genocide. But it was a very diverse legal team. We need to encourage that. Women were involved, persons of color were involved, not because they were women, not because they were persons of color, but because they are good. So we were able to then recognize the contribution that they make and to give them the platform to go and represent, the Republic's interest in that particular matter. We hope to see more and more of this engagement with the ICJ, with the ICC, and so forth and so forth. And what it did, it opened the eyes of our people to the differences between the ICJ and the ICC. The fact that this is a state-to-state dispute, and the ICC that was dealing with al-Bashir and Putin on the other side was a criminal tribunal. So, them having South African lawyers presenting at that level allows our society to start debating around these issues, so that we don't have Twitter lawyers who are going to be misleading others on what these two courts do. People are becoming more and more knowledgeable because we've allowed our lawyers to go out there and shine and bring education and making it fashionable like that. Thank you.
Advocate.
Mr. Facilitator, I'm persuaded to read. Let me read this statement. It's actually the statement by our president. Obviously, they are busy with engagements in Mpumalanga. And he says this: we also felt duty bound because we were taught by Nelson Mandela that our freedom will never be complete until the freedom of Palestinians is also attained. Essentially, and this is what I love about what Prof says, is that, Emma, we saw people that look like us. On the bench, we saw people that look like us, right? Now, that essentially speaks to the change that has happened at global level. It's not the world as in 1948 and in the 1950s, 1960s, right? So our people are able now to take center stage in the world and scare even the big America, even the uncle of the United Kingdom, right? And bring them to their knees, make them write statements on the eve of the court case, because the quality of South African excellence, the quality of South African legal professionals was displayed for the world to see. Win or lose, that is besides the point. We put the best team and the best case forward. That is why those judges that are going in their chambers now are sweaty, because they are worried about what the big brother is going to say, the funder of the court is going to say, and they realize this humongous case that has been presented by these excellent legal practitioners. And to say these are people that studied at the universities that we came from, went to the schools that we went to, says that for me and you, and for many others studying at UNISA, Univen, Forte, and whatever, we have an opportunity also to rise up to the highest level. So now young people like us, international scholars, right, we are now excited because we are charged, we are energized, we are inspired to dream even bigger, so that one day it's us representing the government. One thing that I always, and this Prof, maybe I would, this is now me maybe putting Prof on the spot, is to say that I just wish, despite the diversity, the excellence, and the balance in the team, when we go to the main case, maybe the government must consider inviting military law practitioners also on the team to bring a uniquely military perspective and experience in how we are, because we're going to evaluate the military conduct, commanders' conduct. And now here are a group of people that operate in that domain, that have the experience in those battle spaces, and get them to come and add something different to the main case. But I'd love for Prof to at least express a word or two in as far as my desire is concerned, in terms of the involvement of military law practitioners. Because one thing I always say is that military law practitioners must not be confined to their military bases or barracks. There can be a coexistence between military law practitioners and civilian attorneys and advocates. But anyway, I've it to the universe. Whether it happens or not, it's not a problem. We continue to have an excellent team, but maybe something will happen.
Indeed, Advocate. Professor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Machi. Indeed, Advocate, you are right. When you look at the classroom approach to the law of war, and many people would kill me for using the terms the law of war, because it's fashionable to say IHL, International Humanitarian Law, or the law of armed conflict rather than the law of war. I come from old school. For me, it's always going to be the law of war. When you look at the classroom setting vis-a-vis the law of war in operation, those are two different. So there is a lot that the inclusion of a military law practitioner could do to enhance South Africa's nuances or understanding of the matters when the matter goes on merit. The issues of targeting, issues of the commander on the ground and what goes on in the mind of the commander before actually issuing an order, before determining whether that particular military target is worth taking in light of the collateral damage, and whether the threshold is too high or too low. Those are not abstract issues. If you have within your team a military lawyer who's been on the ground, who was part of the boots on the ground, and who perhaps one who was actually responsible for even advising the military commander to say, Commander, the threshold is within limits, you can issue the order, we can fire. If someone like that as part of the team, they could add so much richness and value to South Africa's legal team. It wouldn't just be a group of lawyers who can understand the textbook of the law of war or the textbook of the law of genocide. It would be a mixture of textbook lawyers and lawyers who have been in the trenches to understand the nuances of making legally binding decisions and while in the heat of passion, so that they can give guidance on how certain things are done and why certain things should be understood or how they should be understood. It could actually add value. Perhaps if the government is listening to this, they might want to take that particular route and add a military law practitioner, it would actually add to South Africa's legal team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I must be honest, colleagues, that as a young scholar, it's a privilege to be part of an event of this caliber, whereby experts are opining on issues that one did not know and now knows. Professor and advocate, I personally appreciate you. I learned a lot from these sessions that we have here. I did the international law a little bit of time ago, but today I feel like I was redoing it, and I appreciate that. Now, colleagues, we just want to have an engagement session as we now draw closer to an end with everybody that have joined us. You are at liberty to unmute and speak. If you want to show a camera, you may do that as well. If you do, you are not, you might also just speak without the camera on, or write the question at the chat, and I'm gonna read it to the panelists. I know Mrs. Tabisa wanted to come in after the engagement earlier on. Ma'am, this is now a question and answer session. Please come in and do your remarks on some of the issues, the response to your question in particular, and touch on that. And other colleagues as well might follow suit as we draw closer to an end. Colleagues, it's already 8:30, and I do not want to prolong everybody here. Mr. Tabisa, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. So for me, it's not, I don't have a question. It's more like a remark and a comment. Just to say thank you very much. I feel so much more enriched by just having been here for the past hour. So I'm a lawyer, but I'm an ordinary lawyer. So a lot of things I would approach them with that hat. So it was very interesting to get an understanding of how it works on the ground in terms of military and military law and military strategy. So that was extremely enriching for me, and I'm very grateful for it. And I hope to join everybody in more of these sessions. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, advocates. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Tabisa. Colleagues, is there anyone with a question to pose to the panel or a remark as well? Let me just quickly go to the chat. There is none in the chat. All right. Professor Advocate, I am just going to call you back to the platform to give your closing remarks, as I will adjourn the session in no time after you have just spoken, my good sir. In no particular order.
For the opportunity. Thank you, colleagues, for sitting through this hour and a half of deliberations. We hope to bring more and more of these talks as and when issues of international law happen across the world, across Africa. If you also come across issues that you believe are worthy of discussion here, please do hit us up. Our contact details are available on our website, www.APGroN, because we use the abbreviation of our organization for our website. So it's apgron.co.za. We have our email there. You can always drop us an email to say, could we discuss this particular issue, especially issues that are burning and issues that will take the continent forward, because ours is to make Africa great again. We believe Africa was once great. It is now on our shoulders to make sure that this continent becomes great again, so that the future generations, our children, can inherit a functioning Africa. Instead of us standing and crying all the time, looking towards the West, we must be taking charge of our own destiny and ensuring that Africa becomes great again. Thank you, colleagues, for coming through.
Dr. Sipho, just on my part, I must definitely thank everybody and Prof for the opportunity to participate. It's truly appreciated. I become a different person every time. But one thing I want to say to ordinary South Africans is that we face so many challenges in our country, and they are real challenges, right? But when our government is doing good, we must be true patriots and support them. But also, I want to say to young people that you don't have to be born in center to make a difference in the world. Here's Ngukai Tobi from Kala, and he is at the world stage, right? With the hair in the same way, you know, African as can be. So let's take this opportunity to participate, develop ourselves, develop each other, and learn from each other. And let these discussions also not just stop here in various corners where we are. Let's continue the engagement on Facebook, on different platforms. Let's continue to engage because we become richer. But also, what I must add to young people, APGroN has space for those that have an interest to write. So if you've got ideas on articles, journal articles that you want to write, approach APGroN. They will support you, to put your thoughts, your ideas down. And I must say, Prof, this is my last remark. As we are focused now on Palestine, we must never forget that there are many, many currently active armed conflicts on the African continent. Mozambique, Ethiopia, Sudan, obviously we know the Sahel, the challenge is there, and I can name even more, but it'll take forever. But the idea is that the humanity we show for Palestine must also be the humanity we show to our own people here on the African continent. As we lobby and as we fight for justice for the Palestinians, we must also fight for justice for other brothers and sisters that have been equally slaughtered on the African continent. Having said that, thank you very much and have a great day further.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mekwa. Thank you very much, Professor Dube. I, Sipho Machia, wishes to thank everybody for attending this progressive and profound session. Colleagues, kindly consider the session adjourned, and may everybody have a lovely